Hey everyone, welcome to Therapy Connections, the podcast where real therapists give you the highlights of the things we say in therapy and provide some skills, education, and ideas about how to feel better. This is not a replacement for traditional therapy, but can serve as a tool for refreshing and learning between sessions. Thanks for joining us.
I'll welcome everybody, and then you can tell about Terrance Orton.
All right. In the spirit of men's mental health, we got the most manly man we could find.
Yes.
So not true. This is overcompensation.
Well, yeah, it adds credibility.
Exactly.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's video. We're excited to have our first guest on. This is Terrance. Terrance, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, my name is Terrance Orton, and I have private practice, Blue Spruce Therapy. I'm an LCSW. As far as therapy goes, I tend to focus on PTSD. That's kind of my forte, but, work with more or less all people, but that's my focus for sure. So
Sweet.
Yeah, we're excited to have Terrance. Shara and I both know Terrance from many years ago. And so we think that he's a very fitting individual to join us, especially because he makes us laugh a lot. So that helps too.
I do what I can. Yeah.
So I know today we wanted to talk about barriers to men's mental health or men seeking treatment. Where do you guys want to start with that? Should we ask Terrance because he's the guest?
Let's just throw it out there. Like, what do you think are some things that make men specifically a little bit hesitant to come into treatment, or maybe our barriers?
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, right, like being a man is all about, being strong and being able to handle whatever comes your way. At least that's kind of the point of view where I'm coming from and what I was taught. So admitting that there's a problem that actually needs addressing is hard to do, because asking for help, and slowing down long enough, actually creating the time to put the effort into getting help is really difficult to do sometimes.
I think there's a bit of an expectation too among men, and I know I feel this, so there's just my 2 cents on a personal level.
And Josh is very manly.
I can't even.
That wasn't sarcastic.
I can't even grow a beard. I've got thoughts on that.
And Terrance combined, you'd have a full head of hair and a beard.
But
Or we wouldn't have any hair.
And the other way around, yeah. Then you'd have two people, one who's very hairy and one who is not at all.
It's the idea of experiencing some kind of challenge that needs to be resolved, but not being able to do it within the confines of my own ability to problem solve it, I think can be tricky among men too. But I want to throw this out there. As we're talking about men's mental health, I came across something in an article that I don't think I've shared with the two of you, and Sherry, you saw it briefly, but can I throw some of these out here that I think might be some barriers, and then we can kind of pick and choose how we want to do this. And I can relate to some of these. You guys will laugh, I'm sure. So here's some things that are oftentimes a barrier to treatment. It costs too much. There you go.
I figured Josh could be the cheapskate.
Now I'm joking about it myself. What are the odds of that? Terrance hit on this one. I don't have time. I'd rather talk to my friends. I have thoughts on that one later if we want to get into it. I saw a psychologist once and it didn't help. What good is talking going to do? I'd feel weird talking about this stuff to a stranger. Therapists don't say anything. I thought that was interesting. Maybe that's just because I talk too much.
I feel like I say a lot sometimes without saying really anything. So
therapists just sit there and judge, and I've heard this one regularly too, therapists don't really care about you. They do it for the money. So reading some of those, which ones stand out to you guys?
I really like the how is talking going to help? Because that is true. Talking just by itself won't help, right? And that's not the point of therapy. The point of therapy is to go and talk, but in a collaborative way that you can kind of come up with a plan together, and a plan to do actions, right? To do actual things. Because yes, talking by itself is not going to help. And I've had experiences where I think we all probably have, where clients come in and eventually they're like, yeah, this just doesn't seem to be helping. And you're like, well, you haven't tried anything yet. You just come and talk. And so I like that one because I think there's truth to it. But it's a little bit of a misrepresentation of what therapy actually is.
Anybody else have thoughts on some that stuck out to them?
That same one kind of stuck out to me, just that how could talking help? Or even the other one, like I would rather talk to my friends. And I could totally understand that one because talking to your friends would be so much more comfortable. But at the same time, your friends have some kind of a stake in it. You know what I mean? Like your friends, if they're a good friend, they're going to really have your back. And even if they're honest friends, which if they're good friends, then they need to also be honest with you. They're so close to the situation that they don't really have an impartial point of view. And so even though it may be more comfortable to talk to your friends, I think that you're not going to have, it's not the same experience. When you come and see a therapist, you might like the therapist, you might have a connection with the therapist, but they're not friends. And there's always going to be a difference between talking to a therapist versus talking to a friend.
Mm-hmm.
I would even, just riffing on this same one, I would, to some degree, agree with both of you. Yeah, talking alone, maybe that doesn't help. You know, there has to be action that comes from it, and I agree. But, what separates us from any other animal? You know, like, it is speech. It is communication. It is being able to frame concepts and consider different points of view. And oftentimes talking is actually the only way we're going to be able to do that. And so if we're just talking to ourselves, then likelihood our viewpoint is going to stay the same. And so getting someone else's perspective, and even if we just go with the cognitive behavior therapy, right? Like, how else are we going to shift perspectives and change the way we think, which will affect our behaviors, which will affect our emotions, if we don't actually take a second and have a conversation about it?
And this is actually true. I didn't really think about that, but so many times I have thoughts in my head and I think they're really good until I say them out loud. And like, even just sitting in a space where you allow yourself to be open and say some of those thoughts out loud so you can hear yourself and actually think about what is coming out of your mouth and what thoughts are going through your head, even just that sometimes can be really helpful.
Absolutely. You look like you had a thought.
I was just going to say, I think we've all had that experience where, like, if you don't say something out loud, if you don't talk to anyone about it, it sits in your head and you like spiral on it and you think about it, and it doesn't really make any sense after a while, but you've convinced yourself somehow it is rational. But yeah, I think getting it out of your mouth sometimes can be helpful to challenge your own thoughts. That's all I was thinking.
Gotcha. Perhaps one experience, and I might have shared this before, that I think helps illustrate this point. If you talk to my wife, you bump into her at the grocery store, you know her, whatever. I'm the best therapist on the planet. She will tell you, right? Until...
I don't think my wife would say the same thing about me.
Like, she's even had experiences before. I think she was going to get her nails done one day and was talking with her nail lady, and somebody who was next to her, they kind of joined the conversation and was asking things. And my wife mentioned that her husband was a therapist, right? And of course, I'm sure you guys get this a lot. Oh, well, we all could use some therapy or blah, blah, blah. And it kind of morphed into, well, can I get contact information? How do I get in contact? And so, of course, my wife is, yeah, he's great. And I appreciate that. And then when she might be anxious, or last week we talked about anger as being one of the reasons men come to therapy, right? When Josh gets annoyed, all of a sudden he's not the best therapist in the world anymore, right? And I think this is a really good way to illustrate the fact that it's good to talk to friends. It's good to just talk. I think you can come to healthy conclusions that way. But your friends, family, it's different when there's a professional for whatever reason. I don't know that I have all the factors of why that makes a difference, but there is a difference. And I think my own spouse would attest to that. She'd probably deny it at first, though.
No, there is something to it for sure. Of like, I tell my clients all the time, like when they're talking about, I've had experience a couple of times recently actually where someone's come in and then brought their spouse like for a one-off thing, and they've been like, "Oh, I feel like I've been telling them this thing, but when you told them, all of a sudden it clicked."
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not that it clicked; it's because I'm sitting in this chair, so now I'm the authority on the situation, right? Because I'm the professional. So I think there is that aspect to it of, I don't know. I think we tend to respect or appreciate or put more stock in the words of someone who's considered a professional.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I go to the doctor, I want the doctor to tell me exactly what needs to take place. That's not always the same as therapy, but that also might just be a Josh thing.
Right, but you don't want some guy just Googling your symptoms and being like, "Listen, I WebMD'd it. I know what you need."
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious what you guys think about therapists don't really care about you. They do it for the money.
I think all of us just had a chuckle when we heard that one. Most people don't realize that therapists don't make great money. It's actually one of the worst paying master's degrees that you can get.
Oh, that's true.
I know I had a friend message me when I was starting my bachelor's degree. He had seen a screenshot of like a MSW pay range. He's like, "Is this what you're doing?" I was like, "Yeah, that's the one." He's like, "Are you sure you want to do that?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure." But I was thinking about this morning actually, because I have had just this client messaging me for the last few days about this stressful situation. And I was like, gosh, I wish I cared less, like so I could just ignore this and like move on with my day. But I tend to think that most therapists end up in the field because they have a personality that does care and that wants to be invested with people. And I think just by nature of someone coming in your office and sitting down and talking about their problems, you guys build a little bit of a connection and you become invested in that person's success.
Yeah, I would say I've had many conversations about this too, over my time. Like, it is a strange profession on some level because it is the therapeutic relationship. It is the fact that you are connecting with another human and caring about someone that makes therapy effective. Like, who cares how much I know or how many certifications I have or where I went to school? If that connection isn't there, none of that's going to matter. So caring is actually a fundamental part of what we do. And I mean, that's also just, it's not mutually exclusive, right? I can care about, there's nothing wrong with choosing a profession that does good and you get paid for it. It does feel weird a little bit sometimes.
Sure.
Absolutely. But yeah, I actually very much understand that concern, and it does seem weird, but they can happen simultaneously. I can make money doing something that I'm good at and caring about people and hopefully helping them. And yeah, that's actually not in conflict like it might initially seem.
Well, I think the research shows that, right? Everyone's familiar with like the number one indicator of successful therapy is your relationship. And so it really is about that. And if therapy is going to work, there has to be a level of care.
Yeah. And look, even if you go to a therapist and you feel like they don't care or you feel like they don't mesh with you, that's not a representation of mental health therapy as a whole. That means that maybe just you and this particular person, this therapist, don't connect, and that happens sometimes. So yeah, try another therapist.
Yeah.
I feel like I have way too many thoughts on all of these, so maybe I should just listen and not talk so much.
Well, we got time. What do you think?
Well, I think there's a couple of things.
Clearly, these therapists talk plenty.
I find it interesting, and it's probably because people have had experiences where therapy does cost too much, right? Or they've had experiences where they don't say anything and they do just listen. To me, that would be a very frustrating therapist to work with, which I think aligns to what Terrance was saying. I don't know how to not care for people who are sharing their life story with me. There was a client that I worked with several years ago, and I ran over here to run an errand for the business the other day. This is a client that Terrance would remember from back when we ran groups together. And I saw this client's parent in line behind me, and all I wanted to do was go up after several years and just see how them and the family were doing.
You didn't because of HIPAA laws. Right.
That's the weird part about all of it is like you care so much, but like when I see you in public, I won't say anything to you.
Exactly, right? And so I think that is one of the very common misconceptions. And to be fair, I've also heard a version of all of these in the almost decade I've been doing this. That's so weird.
Yeah, you're old.
That's right.
I wonder if it's okay if I maybe just ask a question from a female perspective.
Sure.
One of the things that I hear a lot from my male clients is that coming into therapy was really hard for them because they felt like that made them appear weak, or they felt weak for having to come in. And this is an interesting thing for me to consider because I don't particularly feel weak when I talk about my emotions, and most of my female clients don't explain feeling the same way either. So I wondered if you guys could maybe break this down a little bit. What do you think it is about coming into therapy that men sometimes equate with being weak?
I think it kind of goes back to what Terrance said at the start of this. There's like I guess the kind of this like cultural thing we've learned where men are supposed to be stoic and you solve your problems, right? You take care of it. And the idea that you're going to go have someone else help you with that feels weak. Even though I think you can kind of, if you think about it really logically, what requires more strength, right? Acknowledging that you need help, or, I don't know, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and just dealing with it, or not really dealing with it and pretending you are.
Do you have a thought?
Yeah, I mean, strength is interesting because, you know, it gets framed in a lot of different ways. But part of emotional strength is the ability and the awareness and the mindfulness to recognize when you need help and to have so maybe this is more humility than strength, but I think they overlap. But being able to say, hey, I've been trying to deal with this for so long and things aren't changing. They're not moving. I haven't reached whatever goal I've been working for. You know, maybe at this point, maybe the strong thing is to admit that I can't do this on my own and I do need help. And that's not, I mean, it's strong, but it requires humility and honesty with yourself.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
So do men find, I guess as I'm trying to think through this, I mean, my husband doesn't seem to have any problem calling somebody when he's getting stuck with the electrical work in our house, right? I mean, he's calling my brother-in-law and having him come over and crawl in the attic. And I don't think that seems to be a really difficult thing. So is it asking for help in general, or is it asking for help in regards to mental health and emotions?
Well, I mean, this is really hard because we're speaking in generalities. We're speaking, when it comes right down to it, every person is just going to be different.
That's true.
Sure, let's frame this from a men versus women thing, or however. But so there is a bit of gender role difference, I think, that we have from society. So, women traditionally, they're more emotional, they're more caring, there is it's acceptable to show more emotion traditionally. And so I think that kind of speaks to the dynamic you're talking about, how women oftentimes, at least, don't have the same situation as far as going to therapy, where it's difficult, but sometimes they do. But I do think, just given that expectation from society that men are more emotionally strong or stoic or whatever, and that gender role, then it's asking for help with emotions is absolutely different than asking for help with, plumbing.
Sure.
Well, that's what I was going to say. The comment that I was going to make is, I think the key piece in this is emotions. I mean, on the personal, I don't love asking for help in other areas either, but I did electrical work for a little bit years ago, and I had to have an electrician come cut a hole in my ceiling and fish wire through.
What's wrong with you?
Could I have? No, right?
Why didn't you just figure that out on your own?
Yeah, I love asking for help.
I feel like he was like Superman and had X-ray vision, because he's like, I bet your wire has like a screw that went through and caused it to pop. And sure enough, as he pulled it out, that's exactly where it was. But coming from this idea of asking for help, do any of us bat an eye when we need our taxes done at the end of the year? I've never done my own taxes. I could have learned that, but starting a business, man, first thing I did was hire an accountant. Right? I have a financial advisor that I work with. Educate me on this area of the world I know nothing about. And those things don't feel like you're weak when you ask for help in those areas. But if it's, I'm angry with my kids, or I can't seem to do anything right and my spouse says I need to go to therapy, those kinds of things, for whatever reason, I think has that stigma. So I guess the long answer to your question in the short version would be, it probably is a mental health and emotional stigma piece, although I really like what Terrance said, and that's more of a general statement. But there's this perception that when it comes to emotions and solving easy problems, you just figure it out.
So really, this might be something that could be really helpful if people would think about going to therapy and getting help from a therapist in the same way they would think about getting help from an electrician or a plumber, right? You get some help from a plumber because you need some help with plumbing. You get some help from a financial advisor because you don't know everything about that world. And maybe you get help from a therapist because you need some help managing emotions or behaviors.
I don't spend my entire day, despite what at least the two of you think, researching stocks and mutual funds. There's a guy that does that all day, every day. And so when I give him money, he says, what are we doing with it? I said, I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah.
It's good, So to some degree, yes.
I think it comes to that expectation, right? There's no one expects me to know how to wire my house, right? But I think sometimes we're expected, no, you should just be able to manage your emotions. And kind of shifting that idea, we teach kids how to do math, we teach kids how to read, but we don't always teach kids how to manage emotions or how to manage behaviors. And so recognizing, I think viewing it as a service, right? This is something no one ever taught me how to do, so I need to go learn how to do it. And viewing it that way might be a little bit easier to swallow or more beneficial, maybe.
Or perhaps even taught poorly, because sometimes that happens too.
Yeah, probably more often that.
Yeah. Anyway, just a couple of thoughts on things that I think, as we discussed last week, that are barriers for men getting treatment. And I have heard at least some version of all of those in the office over the years.
Yeah. So I think at the end, we always try to sort of share an intervention with people or something like that. And in this case, I think it would be a good idea to write down why not go to therapy, right? What are your barriers? What are the things that are holding you back? And take a little time diving into each of those and see how much sense they actually make. Because maybe it is just some of that fear or that stigma that's holding people back. And instead, really look at what things are stopping you, because there's a lot to be gained from coming to therapy too.
Hey, Jaden here. Thanks for joining us today. We hope you found something useful in today's episode. If you did, and you want to keep up on the content we're going to be making, please subscribe, follow, or leave us a positive review. It helps us a lot. Again, thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time.